On the air, bringing you up to date on these extraordinary developments in Armenia and in this country. One of the most devastating earthquakes of this century has occurred in the southern part of the Soviet Union. The initial death toll estimates from 30,000 to 50,000. Leninaikin is one of the principal cities. It has been heavily hit, and there are continuing reports of schools leveled, apartments down, all factories are down as well. It hit yesterday morning, registering 6.9 on the Richter scale. This is some of the damage. We have been showing you these pictures repeatedly because this is the only videotape that has been available from that area. But that gives you some idea of the dimension of the damage. And it occurred when people were in schools and at work and in their apartments as well. Total devastation. So great that Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev has cut short his trip to this country, to Cuba and Great Britain. He will be returning momentarily. He'll be leaving Midtown New York, then going to Kennedy Airport for a flight back to Moscow. And then he'll go personally to that part of the Soviet Union to personally supervise the rescue operations. Armenia, of course, has been the scene of great political turmoil. There's been a lot of unhappiness with the policies of the Kremlin. There has been a feud going on between the Azerbaijanis, who are Muslims, and the Armenians, who are Christian, about control over various sectors of that part of the Soviet Union. So this is at once a tragedy, but perhaps a political opportunity as well for Mikhail Gorbachev. At the White House right now, NBC News White House correspondent Andrea Mitchell, because President Reagan has been in the Oval Office this morning after his series of meetings with the Soviet president yesterday. Andrea, what's the latest there?
Well, the White House has not announced this yet, but I have been told that the president at about 10:20 Eastern Time did call Mikhail Gorbachev to express his personal sorrow over this terrible tragedy. I'm told by someone who was in the room and was taking notes that the president said that if there is anything at all that the United States can do, either bilaterally or internationally through international organizations such as the United Nations, that he wanted to know right away. We do not yet know what Gorbachev's response was, but we've been told that the Soviet ambassador had told the National Security Advisor that they understood, the Soviets well understood that they were aware of these continuing offers. But now this was a personal gesture by the president to Gorbachev in a phone call shortly before he went into an extended meeting with advisors in the White House Theater, Tom, where he is preparing for tonight's news conference. It will probably be his last from the White House East Room as president.
Andrea, as I understand it, during the course of their luncheon discussion yesterday, the earthquake did come up because it had already occurred by then, of course, but the Soviets had no sense of just how devastating it was. Is that right?
In fact, I'm told that Foreign Minister Shevardnadze opened the luncheon with a briefing on the earthquake, but at the time, as you say, they were not aware of the extent of the damage. That it was discussed, and at the luncheon, the president made his initial offer to Gorbachev of any help. Now, as the day proceeded, we were told later that Soviet officials were getting early reports from the area that it was more serious than they had originally thought, but it wasn't until a high-level Soviet delegation arrived in the area that they realized the extent of the damage, and that is why Foreign Ministry spokesman Gerasimov had the embarrassment, really, that evening of saying that no, there would be no reason to cut short the Gorbachev visit, and then only a few hours later, Dubinin was calling Powell shortly before midnight to say that, in fact, it was going to be cut short. So it was really because of late reports. The telephone lines from the area were all down, and it was not until the Moscow delegation arrived that they really assessed the damage.
Thank you very much, Andrea Mitchell, who will be on duty all day long there at the White House. Standing outside the Soviet mission here in New York on the Upper East Side, 67th Street, is NBC's Stan Bernard. And Stan, we expect the Soviet president, Mikhail Gorbachev, to leave there, what, in about 10 minutes or so?
Just about that, Tom. It's now 5 after. We have him on schedule at 11:15. Ever since that press conference last night, or really this morning at about 12:03, when Foreign Minister Shevardnadze made this incredible announcement, it was a grim news conference. He was sad, he was white-faced as he announced this cancellation of the rest of this visit. It was rather an extraordinary moment. He confirmed what Andrea just said, that they were getting reports all through the evening, and then it occurred to them just the proportion of this kind of a disaster, and they had to make the decision. Overnight, we have learned that it was a night of half-eaten hamburgers as everybody scrambled to prepare the logistics to change everything midstream, all the cancellation of all the events today, and to put together this trip to the airport, a lightning trip, which should begin in just a few moments, and then back to Moscow, and then on to Yerevan.
Thanks very much, Stan Bernard, who's standing by outside the mission. Just to review for you, Soviet leader Gorbachev and his wife Raisa did have a very full schedule today. They were going to open this morning at about this time a Soviet trade exhibit at the Javits Convention Center in New York. Then they were going to be going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where they would be given a tour by William Lures, who does speak Russian, by the way. He's the president of the museum, former American ambassador to Czechoslovakia. And then there would be a reception tonight given by the Soviet ambassador to the United Nations. And many dignitaries and people interested in U.S.-USSR relations were going to be invited to that. Tomorrow morning, Gorbachev was scheduled to leave for Cuba, where he had important business on the agenda with Fidel Castro. Maybe some more surprises in store there about the future of U.S. relations and USSR relations with Castro and the level of support not only for the Cuban regime but also for Nicaragua. And then on to Great Britain for a meeting with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the wake of this dramatic announcement yesterday that he would be cutting troop forces and tank divisions along the European borders. One more effort on the part of Gorbachev to win support in that important part of the world. At the airport at the moment, NBC's John Cochran and Bob Abernathy, who are standing by there, and there is the Soviet president's plane in the background. Gentlemen, what do we know?
Well, we know he's going to be coming out here, we're told, about 11:40 Eastern time, Tom. That's what's going to be. That's about a half an hour from now. This was hastily arranged, as Stan Bernard was saying. They've got the security in place here. The security's been a little frantic this morning, but all the press are finally in place here. And I think that in New York there is mixed relief over Mr. Gorbachev going and easing some of the traffic problems. Sadness, of course, of what's happening in his home country. And also sadness over the fact that despite all the inconvenience, a lot of New Yorkers were getting a lot of kick about having him in town. Wouldn't you say so, Bob?
A wonderful reaction, very enthusiastic. I would like to add to what has already been said about the importance of Mr. Gorbachev's going back to see what he can do. As Foreign Minister Shevardnadze said last night, when people are suffering, President Gorbachev wants to be there. It's not only a question of what he can do there, it's also a question of avoiding the unseemly juxtaposition that there would have been had he stayed and gone through this day of tourism, perhaps shopping in New York, at a time when there's been such a tragedy back home.
It would have been highly inappropriate. We'll keep Bob Abernathy and John Cochran there. In Burbank right now, NBC News science correspondent Bob Bazell, who has been talking with seismologists about the dimensions of this earthquake, 6.9 on the Richter scale, and as Bob is about to tell us, that is a major shaker in a part of the world where they've had a number of earthquakes, I gather, Bob.
Tom, that is indeed a major shaker. 6.9 is an earthquake that can cause a lot of damage, but as we said before, it doesn't necessarily have to cause that much damage. This seems to be, as you said, one of the major earthquakes of this century. We don't know exactly why it caused so much damage. One of the reasons is the way the buildings are built in that area. Another has to do with the type of geology. Certain types of rocks cause things to shake more, and that just causes more damage. With me here in the Burbank studio is Dr. Varkas Najarian, who's the president of Medical Outreach for Armenia.
That's correct.
Dr. Najarian has been speaking through the night to friends, relatives, and others in Armenia. What can you tell us about how bad the situation is there?
Well, I had 3 calls last night from Armenia, and the situation is catastrophic. We had a very bad connection, and all I could hear was there are many, many thousands of dead, and we want medications, and as fast as possible to include doctors, physicians, and any kind of help.
Has there been a lot of movement of people because of the political situation to the area where the earthquake occurred?
There have been refugees, of course, with the Karabakh conflict, but many of them had come to the Yerevan area. Now, Leninagan, where the epicenter probably was, is a city of 350,000. I'm sure many refugees also had gone there.
Did you get a sense of whether any of the city was still standing or whether it had been total devastation?
What I heard was 60% of Leninagan, which I said has a population of 350,000, is 60% destroyed. And another smaller city called Spidag, there are only 3 buildings standing in ruins.
So this is an astoundingly large earthquake.
Correct. Everything is flattened.
So, Tom, you can hear from that description that we've seen an earthquake that has not been experienced in modern times. We just have nothing to compare this to. This seems to be one of the worst earthquakes that we've ever seen. Tom?
Are you going to be able to get a chartered plane? There had been some talk about the ability of your group to organize medical supplies and to round up some doctors and fly there. Have you been getting the cooperation of the Soviet authorities in this regard?
Tom, we have about 15 tons of medical supplies, which we have packed in 600 boxes, and we've been trying to send. Now, as you say, we have been trying to get some landing rights into Yerevan directly, and we are waiting a response from the Soviet authorities, and I hope the answer will be in the affirmative. We're also trying to organize a group of physicians to go with us either today and tomorrow. At the same time, they're in very bad need of antibiotics, tetanus, water purification kits, and all sorts of medication, of course, including hospital supplies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Najarian. Of course, we wish you the very best in this really heroic rescue effort for the people that you feel so close to in far-off Armenia who've been devastated by this earthquake today. We'll be checking with you along the way to see how you're doing. John Chancellor is here with me now. It is going to be another indication of just how the Soviets have changed their way of doing business as to whether or not they welcome the likes of Dr. Najarian and his efforts to send supplies there. In the past, if there would be this kind of a devastation, they'd say, we don't need outside help. We can handle this by ourselves. There was always that xenophobia of the Soviets to say, listen, we stand on our own.
But I think Chernobyl made the difference. I think when they had the meltdown at the nuclear plant, they realized that this old bureaucratic, xenophobic way of keeping people out, and the defense ministry is part of that too, Tom. They worry about air defenses and all of that. I think they've realized that that just doesn't work. And so my guess is, and certainly our hope is, that Dr. Najarian and the others there'll be a massive relief effort. What I also find kind of stunning about this great disaster is that Gorbachev's political problem in Armenia and Azerbaijan has in effect been, nature has intervened. If you have 50,000 dead people, it changes the dynamics of the situation completely. And finally, Tom, I just think it's also interesting that the Soviet leader here in New York could have canceled his schedule today, stayed on the telephone, run things from the mission here, but instead, and then gone on possibly with his visit. Instead, bang, he's right out there and heading for Yerevan. And that tells us something about the Soviet system.
John Chancellor at the airport right now. NBC's John Cochran and Bob Abernathy are standing by with the American ambassador to the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock. Gentlemen, Bob?
Tom, Ambassador Matlock is here as one of the Americans bidding goodbye to President Gorbachev. Mr. Ambassador, is there any reason other than the earthquake that Mr. Gorbachev might be hurrying back?
Oh, I can think of none whatsoever. I think the earthquake has been such a tragedy that it's quite appropriate that he feels he needs to go back home at this point. I think that's completely understandable, and I don't think one needs to look for any other reasons.
Mr. Ambassador, we've been speculating this morning that although the primary reason would, of course, be the earthquake, that while there, you might try to deal with some of the racial and nationalistic problems in the area, some of the unrest. Do you think this offers an opportunity for him to actually speak to these people face-to-face in their home region, the Armenians?
Well, I think you really have to ask him what he will do other than deal with it, but I think the basic motivation for going back is exactly what he said. When there is a tragedy, when people are suffering, the leaders need to be there with them and to lead the recovery effort and whatnot, and I really think that is the reason, and as I said before, I see no reason to look further.
What, Mr. Ambassador, what is it in a practical way that the United States could do to help? The President has offered help. What could we do?
Well, you know, if they need it, obviously we have teams that can fly in things like tents, medical supplies. There are also available people who are experienced in search and rescue. Now, it may well be that they have enough of this, so obviously it will be up to them to what degree they would like us to help. We certainly stand ready. It is an enormous tragedy, and I think everyone with the capacity to help would like to pitch in if they're needed.
Do you have any figures of our own, American figures, about the extent of the tragedy?
No, we don't, and frankly, I think that the local people are still, in effect, digging out, and I don't think as yet anyone has accurate figures.
Mr. Ambassador, you're the ranking expert on the Soviet Union, the ranking criminologist in the United States government at the moment. Any surprises from Mr. Gorbachev yesterday, either in his speech at the UN or in his talks with the President and the Vice President?
It was a good speech, I think. Not that we agreed with every point, but the thrust of it, I think, was very positive. The President has indicated this. The Secretary of State has indicated this. As far as surprises, obviously we had a feeling in general what might be in it. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Shevardnadze gave the Secretary of State a general briefing in advance. So, no, there were no real surprises, but we were pleased to see many of the things that were in it. I think it was a positive speech.
Mr. Ambassador, we have a question coming from Tom Brokaw back in the studio. Tom?
Yes, I was just going to ask the ambassador when he intends to go back to Moscow and whether he'll make an extraordinary effort on part of the United States to speak to the Soviet people about the willingness of the United States to be helpful at this time of great tragedy.
Mr. Ambassador, when are you going to, Tom Brokaw is asking, when will you be going back, and what will you be, when you go back to the Soviet Union, will you possibly directly address the Soviet people? Will you be saying we want to help you in any way? Will you be going on Soviet television conveying our sympathy and our wish to help?
I will be returning tomorrow, and if I'm given the opportunity, I would be very happy to do that, but there are no specific plans. Obviously, that depends upon Soviet television.
Is it a lot easier in the current climate to be helpful and for the Soviets to accept our help?
I would think so. I would certainly think so.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Ambassador, many thanks.
Thank you.
Good trip.
Bob Abernathy and John Cochran and the United States Ambassador to the Soviet Union, Jack Matlock. This is a special NBC News report on this historic earthquake today in Armenia, historic proportions. A great tragedy. At 30,000 people, the latest estimate, perhaps as many as 50,000. We've had some rough estimates that it could go even higher than that in terms of the death toll. Whole cities have been leveled, and of course they've not yet reached some of the rural villages. That's a mountainous, primitive part of the Soviet Union, although the cities are quite modern in many parts of Armenia and the Caucasus Mountains there. The fact of the matter is that it's going to be very hard to get to some of those regions for several more hours. Peter Kent is standing by now in Moscow. And Peter, what's the latest? It's there, what, early evening, about 7:15 or so now?
Yes, Tom, it's just after 7 o'clock at night, and I think the ambassador's perception of the situation here is quite accurate. There is a massive rescue and recovery operation underway. The Army has been mounting flights all day from around the country, from the other republics untouched by the earthquake, getting in rescue supplies, blood, emergency supplies like tents and blankets. The Central Committee has set up an emergency operations control center in Yerevan, the Armenian capital. But despite glasnost, this is still very much an information-controlled society, and most of those who control the dissemination of information are in the United States with President Gorbachev. The most authoritative statement on Soviet television today was a replay of Foreign Minister Shevardnadze's midnight news conference. We expect new pictures, the first in 24 hours, in about 2 hours from now on the main Soviet evening newscast. There have been phone calls from some of the areas less affected by the earthquake where communications weren't knocked out, and they tell of massive destruction, as you reported. The areas worst hit near the epicenter, we have only the word of individuals who have gone in and come out. They say that entire villages, one village of 16,000 souls was almost completely flattened. The second largest city in Soviet Armenia, Leninakan, which has between 200 and 300,000 people resident there, is reported to be 50% destroyed. This from the Soviet Foreign Ministry this afternoon. At the Foreign Ministry this afternoon, in answer to a request of whether or not the Soviet Union was asking for help from the world outside, they said they would accept any humanitarian offers, but seem to be trying to give the impression that for the time being, they're trying to establish the magnitude of the disaster and are trying to cope with it with their own immediate resources. Around Moscow tonight, there are a number of centers which have been set up and to which Muscovites have been asked to carry clothing, blankets, to go to special blood donation clinics to try and get the life-saving supplies down there as quickly as possible.
It's what, about 2,000 miles from Moscow, isn't it? And what about
That's right.
And what about the airport landing facilities? There are military installations, I know, in that area, but have they been damaged as well?
Well, we understand that an awful lot of the work in the most severely hit area, in Armenia and as well as in parts of Azerbaijan and Soviet Georgia, helicopters are being used. We have not, and again, airports are areas of very strict security control. There has been no description of the condition of the runways in any of the areas. We assume that Yerevan is capable of receiving aircraft. And there is one account here that says after President Gorbachev arrives back tomorrow, he will immediately change aircraft after a briefing and move down to Yerevan to personally take control of the emergency operation.
Thanks very much, Peter Kent in Moscow. And standing by just outside the Soviet mission with an update now on the departure plans of Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev is NBC's Stan Bernard. Stan, what's the latest?
Tom, as you can see behind me, these cars are getting into position. There's a heightened sense that something's going to happen any moment, but there has apparently been a delay. What we said before, 11:15, has now been moved to 11:50, 11:50. We don't know what caused the delay, but that's been announced now by the New York Police Department, and everybody is assembled. We are waiting for Mr. Gorbachev.
Thanks very much, Stan Bernard, outside the Soviet mission on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. This departure that will occur at around 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time of Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev to go back to the Soviet Union to personally supervise the rescue and the repair situation that is going to be required for several months now in the Republic of Armenia and in parts of Azerbaijan. Those are two republics on the southern edge of the Soviet Union, just on the border with Turkey. We'll be back when the Soviet president does leave the Soviet mission, and we'll have continuing coverage throughout the day on this terrible tragedy in the southern part of the Soviet Union. 30 to 50,000 people dead. Those are the original estimates. On behalf of John Chancellor here in the studio with me and all the folks with NBC News who are at their posts around New York City and in Moscow and in Washington, we'll see you later today.
This has been an NBC News special report. We now join the program already in progress.
Do a few nice prizes, and here's MG.